At the opening of the 18th century, Hartford stood along the Connecticut River as a modest colonial town, its wooden houses clustered near Meetinghouse and Wharf, shaped by Puritan governance, seasonal trade rhythms, and regional connections to surrounding settlements. Founded earlier in the 17th century, the town by 1700 had established agricultural patterns relying on river floodplains, where fertile soils supported corn and livestock, while upland areas provided timber, fuel, and limited pasture for expanding households steadily growing. The Connecticut River defined Hartford's geographic position, serving as both transportation corridor and economic lifeline, linking inland farms to coastal markets, while seasonal currents and ice dictated the timing of shipments and constrained movement during harsh winter months. Local governance remained closely tied to congregational structures, where church membership influenced civic authority, reinforcing a social order grounded in religious conformity, communal oversight, and collective decision-making through town meetings that regulated land use and moral conduct. Economic activity centered on subsistence farming supplemented by trade, as surplus grain, livestock, and timber moved along the river, while imported goods such as textiles, tools, and ceramics arrived through coastal exchange networks connecting Hartford to Boston and beyond. Artisans operated within this modest economy, producing essential goods including barrels, shoes, and simple metalwork, while blacksmiths and carpenters supported agricultural life, reflecting a localized system where production and consumption remained closely intertwined within the community. Population growth during these decades proceeded gradually, as families expanded and new settlers arrived, leading to the subdivision of land and the extension of roads, which connected Hartford more firmly to neighboring towns in the Connecticut Colony. Education took form through small schools emphasizing religious instruction and literacy, ensuring that scripture could be read and understood, reinforcing the intellectual framework of the community while preparing younger generations for participation in both church and civic life. Relations with indigenous peoples had already shifted by 1700, following earlier conflicts and treaties, leaving Hartford within a colonial landscape where native presence persisted but was increasingly marginalized as English settlement expanded and land control consolidated. Trade patterns reflected both opportunity and limitation, as river access enabled exchange, yet the town remained dependent on external markets, exposing local producers to fluctuations in demand, prices, and transport conditions shaped by broader Atlantic economic currents. Household labor formed the foundation of daily life, with men, women, and children contributing to farming, food preparation, and craft production, creating a self-sustaining structure where economic survival depended on coordinated effort within extended family units. By the early 18th century, Hartford had developed a recognizable civic layout, with meetinghouse, common, and clustered dwellings forming a central nucleus, while outlying farms stretched along roads that followed natural contours and river access points. Seasonal cycles governed activity, as planting, harvesting, and winter preparation structured the year, reinforcing a rhythm that balanced agricultural necessity with religious observance, particularly the Sabbath, which imposed a pause on labor and emphasized communal identity. Land ownership patterns revealed emerging inequalities, as larger holdings accumulated among established families, while newer settlers managed smaller plots, shaping a social hierarchy that, though less rigid than European models, still influenced opportunity and influence. Legal structures in Hartford reflected colonial statutes, with local courts addressing disputes over land, debts, and conduct, reinforcing order while adapting English legal traditions to the practical realities of a small but growing provincial community. The town's connection to the wider Connecticut Colony ensured that decisions made in Hartford resonated beyond its borders, contributing to regional governance while remaining subject to colonial authorities and, ultimately, to directives from England. Material culture remained simple, with homes constructed of wood and furnished modestly, yet these spaces reflected stability and continuity, as families invested labor into maintaining dwellings that could endure seasonal extremes and generational transitions. Religious life remained central, with sermons addressing both spiritual and practical concerns, reinforcing discipline while interpreting daily challenges through a theological lens that shaped perceptions of hardship, prosperity, and communal responsibility. Over time, Hartford's steady development contributed to a broader colonial pattern, where inland towns expanded gradually, strengthening economic networks and reinforcing a regional structure that would later support more complex forms of political organization. The reliance on river transport underscored both advantage and vulnerability, as weather, water levels, and distance influenced trade reliability, embedding uncertainty within the economic framework and encouraging cautious planning among merchants and farmers. Social cohesion depended on shared norms and mutual dependence, yet tensions occasionally surfaced around land distribution, authority, and economic disparity, revealing the limits of consensus within a community balancing growth with inherited traditions. By 1725, Hartford had solidified its role as a stable colonial town, its structures, practices, and relationships forming a foundation that would persist, shaping its trajectory as it continued to adapt within the evolving economic and political landscape of the 18th century. By the mid-18th century, Hartford's population continued to expand steadily, with families occupying increasingly subdivided lands, extending settlement patterns outward while maintaining a central town core that anchored religious, political, and commercial activities within the Connecticut Colony. Agriculture remained dominant, yet diversification became more visible, as farmers experimented with additional crops and livestock strategies, responding to soil conditions and market opportunities, gradually shifting from strict subsistence toward a mixed system integrating local consumption and external trade. The Connecticut River continued to define Hartford's geographic and economic position, enabling movement of goods such as grain, meat, and timber toward coastal ports, while imported goods moved inland, reinforcing Hartford's role within a broader regional exchange network. Merchants began to play a more visible role in town life, coordinating shipments and managing credit relationships, linking Hartford's producers to Atlantic markets, and introducing new economic dependencies that tied local prosperity to distant commercial fluctuations and imperial trade structures. Artisan activity expanded alongside population growth, with blacksmiths, coopers, weavers, and carpenters producing goods for both local use and limited export, reflecting a gradual shift toward specialized labor within an otherwise agriculturally centered economy. Household economies adapted to these changes, as families balanced farming with small-scale production, ensuring resilience against poor harvests or market instability, while maintaining traditional labor divisions that structured daily routines across generations. Transportation networks beyond the river improved incrementally, as roads connecting Hartford to surrounding towns became more defined, facilitating overland travel, increasing communication, and supporting the exchange of goods, ideas, and administrative directives across the colony. Religious institutions remained central, though subtle changes emerged, as sermons and congregational life reflected evolving concerns, including economic pressures and social order, while maintaining doctrinal continuity that continued to guide moral expectations and communal discipline. Educational practices expanded modestly, with increased emphasis on literacy and numeracy, reflecting the practical needs of a society engaging more actively in trade, record-keeping, and legal affairs, while still grounded in religious instruction and community oversight. Legal and administrative structures grew more complex, as disputes over property, trade, and contracts increased, requiring more formalized procedures within local courts, illustrating the gradual institutional development accompanying Hartford's economic and demographic growth. By the 1740s, Hartford's economy exhibited clearer integration into Atlantic systems, as colonial goods were exchanged for manufactured imports, embedding the town within imperial economic frameworks that shaped production decisions and influenced local wealth distribution. This integration produced uneven outcomes, as some merchants and landowners accumulated greater resources, while smaller farmers faced pressures from debt and fluctuating markets, contributing to a subtle but growing stratification within Hartford's social structure. Public spaces in Hartford, including the meeting house and common areas, continued to function as centers of communication and governance, where announcements, decisions, and disputes were shared, reinforcing transparency while sustaining collective participation in civic life. Interactions with neighboring towns intensified, as Hartford's position within the colony encouraged administrative coordination, trade partnerships, and shared infrastructure development, strengthening regional cohesion while maintaining local autonomy in daily governance. Military concerns occasionally surfaced, particularly during periods of imperial conflict, prompting local organization and preparation, though Hartford itself remained relatively removed from direct warfare, contributing resources and manpower within the colonial framework. Material life reflected incremental improvement, as households acquired more durable goods, including improved tools and imported items, signaling modest increases in prosperity for some residents while maintaining overall simplicity characteristic of colonial New England settlements. Seasonal rhythms persisted as a structuring force, yet economic diversification introduced additional demands on time and labor, requiring careful management of agricultural cycles alongside emerging commercial responsibilities tied to trade and production schedules. Political awareness within Hartford gradually expanded, as colonial policies and external decisions influenced taxation, trade regulation, and governance, fostering a more attentive and occasionally critical perspective among local leaders and engaged citizens. Community cohesion remained strong but was increasingly tested by economic disparity and differing interests, requiring negotiation and compromise within town meetings, where collective decisions balanced tradition with the pressures of ongoing change. The town's built environment evolved slowly, with additional structures supporting commerce and administration, while maintaining a recognizable layout centered on communal institutions, reflecting continuity alongside measured adaptation to growth. Long-term structural changes during this period positioned Hartford within an increasingly interconnected colonial system, where economic, political, and social developments reinforced one another, shaping a trajectory that would influence the town's response to future transformations. By 1760, Hartford had become more than a modest agricultural settlement, functioning as a stable and integrated community whose evolving economy, governance, and social dynamics reflected broader patterns across the Connecticut Colony and the wider British Atlantic world. By the early 1760s, Hartford existed within a maturing colonial framework, its institutions firmly established, yet increasingly influenced by shifting imperial policies that began to affect taxation, trade, and governance throughout the Connecticut Colony. Economic life remained anchored in agriculture, but reliance on external markets deepened, as farmers and merchants depended more heavily on predictable trade conditions, exposing Hartford's economy to disruptions caused by imperial regulations and changing commercial expectations. The Connecticut River continued to serve as the town's principal artery, facilitating movement of goods and information, while its seasonal limitations reinforced the importance of planning and storage, shaping both agricultural production and trade timing within the local economy. Merchants in Hartford became more attentive to imperial legislation.